Well, the Penn State thing fascinates me, Sean. It is because they have been good. By any measure, they have been very good over the last 8 years. But because Ohio State has been so good, because Michigan has been so good, they have essentially been blocked from being able to do the things that define success in this era. And I'll never get over being at that Michigan game last year in Happy Valley, listening to the fans boo the play calling in the first quarter. Like it's a strange place to be because you're in Penn State's in a position where 90% of the fan bases would trade for their last 8 years, but they're just incredibly frustrated.
Absolutely. The win total, like it's so funny to think, oh, double-digit wins and kind of snort at it. It's kind of become the expectation. James Franklin got booed last week at Thon, which is an event.
the dance marathon where they raise all the money for cancer research.
Yes, and I'm not sure how widespread it was. There's not really videos or anything, but like it takes a special kind of a person to do that. But no, I mean, you look at the reality here. Excuse me. It just beats you over the head over and over, losing to Michigan, losing to Ohio State, more so Ohio State, because Penn State has actually played Michigan okay.
Right.
And it's been frustrating because the way that they've lost is like, yes, the games have kind of been close, but you're kind of keeping it at arm's length. And it's the little brother attacking the big brother and the big brother just sticking his hand out. And that's how it's been. And you were at that Michigan game last year, and you pick up on these trends. You pick up on these the offense is not what it needs to be against the big guys, and it's going to score 50 points against the guys that don't matter. And that's where Penn State fans have kind of fallen into. Go ahead.
But everything's new this year, and some intentionally and some not. So the schedule's different because the Big Ten membership is changing and the scheduling format is changing. The playoff format is changing. They fired Mike Yurcich after that Michigan game, hired Andy Kotelnicki to run the offense. Manny Diaz, they did not want to get rid of. He got the Duke head coach job, so they bring in Tom Allen, who got fired at Indiana as the head coach. It feels like everything's different other than James Franklin. The question is the James Franklin part of it going to make it feel the same?
I find that you're not going to convince a lot of people, especially in Central Pennsylvania, that things are going to change, even though you've got new coordinators on both sides. Well, new special teams coordinator as well. Stacey Collins is out to Boise State. He did a heck of a job here. But it's been so consistent with what you've seen is that defense first, special teams is typically strong. Offense has been there 10 weeks a year and not there 2 weeks a year. So like the consistencies, I think, are sort of wearing on that. And you're right. There's change now. There's change in the schedule. There's change in, you're not seeing Michigan and Ohio State on the schedule every year. That's absolutely huge. And go back to what you said earlier. I don't think there's anybody, and this is obviously open for discussion, but anybody that suffered more not only from the playoff format, but from the division format that the Big Ten put themselves in, to put those three in every single season playing each other, shooting themselves in the foot with that, and then getting to December, playing Wisconsin, Northwestern, whoever was in the West. Purdue, I think, made it. Like, that is like mind blowing to me when you talk about, like, not only from a Penn State perspective, but from a Michigan perspective as well, just sort of shutting yourself out. Now that obviously changes with the 12 game, and I think that's a big part of why you mentioned earlier that automatic, or the push for the automatic bids, is, hey, you lose that championship game when you have your best teams in it, which has not always been the case. That gives you some wiggle room. So that's if we're going back to saying the right things, that's kind of where that comes back and ties around.
Yeah, and Penn State, because it was in the East, is not in the position of the teams that were in the Big Ten West that really probably have to retool how they think about everything, because they're not trying to win the Big Ten West anymore. They're trying to win the whole Big Ten. Penn State was trying to do that all along. Was close, but you mentioned the frustration on offense. Now, I will say, Andy Kotelnicki's offense at Kansas was probably the most fun to watch in terms of creativity. I mean, he would put Jalen Daniels and Jason Bean, the two quarterbacks, on the field at the same time and come up with plays for them. So, you think about what he might be able to do with Katron Allen and Nick Singleton in that offense. Drew Allar, Julian Fleming coming over from Ohio State in the transfer portal at receiver. It feels exciting, but you go through the Franklin era, whether it's John Donovan, Mike Yurcich, I mean, whoever the OC is, you have not seen a lot of creative. Really, the Trace McSorley, Joe Moorhead combination is the only time you felt like, hey, these guys can see the matrix here.
Yeah, and you try to replicate that as much as possible. Like, and I think that's what James is, I don't want to say falling back into, but like you want to recapture that magic. You're not doing it with a quarterback that can run right now, and that's going to be where the adjustment comes. You mentioned getting 2 quarterbacks on the field; they're very high on Bo Prabula, but I think really it's just the excitement factor. The big plays were such a hallmark of the Joe Moorhead era, and they kind of went away under Mike Yurcich and against the right teams. I mean, you look at last year at Kansas; they lost at Oklahoma State, but they still scored 32 points. You look back to this Penn State Ohio State rivalry, and it was 2022 when they played them okay. JTT kind of came over and just did anything he wanted to do and forced several turnovers, but they scored points in that day. They actually outcoached Ohio State, whatever that's going to mean, but they outcoached Ohio State. They put themselves in a position and they turned the ball over a bunch. But like people were okay with that. You know, you're never okay with it. Ohio State, Michigan lost, but people were okay with it because there was excitement that comes with it. Points bring excitement. They just haven't had the points in the clutch games. I mean, yeah, it's great to go out and beat Rutgers, beat Maryland, do whatever you have to do, score a ton of points, and it's everybody has fun that Saturday. But then a couple of weeks later, when you're going to Columbus, when you're going to Ann Arbor, when those teams are coming here, it's just it's 2 different football teams. It's 2 different coaches, and how much does that fall on? You know, Yurcich obviously took the sword for it, but how much does that fall on Franklin? How much does that fall on like just your general culture and your general approach?
Well, and lack of dynamic receivers is the problem. When we talk about the Moorhead era, like in 2016, they had Chris Godwin. Like Deshaun Hamilton was on those teams. Saquon Barkley was a big part of the passing game
Mike Gesicki
in those teams. Yeah. I mean, so that's part of it too, is the athletes. Now, the hope was last year, Quintez Cephas was supposed to be that guy. Didn't work out. He's gone elsewhere. Julian Fleming comes in from Ohio State. I don't think Julian Fleming's necessarily that guy, but he could be a consistent pass catcher who gives you another option on the outside.
Yeah, he gives you something that Ohio State wide receiver room is the best in the country for a reason. And it's not just because they have the best athletes. They do have the best athletes, but so that doesn't hurt. But the approach and the mentality is something that was sorely lacking from this room last year. They expected Keandre Lambert-Smith to be the guy. And for a large portion of the year, he was. And then I think he caught 3 balls in the last month of the season and was barely on the field a lot during that stretch run. So that was tough. Trey Wallace is a guy they think is incredibly talented. Trey Wallace can't stay on the field. He can't stay healthy. So you have several questions. You have talent in that room, but you have several questions about that mentality. And I think bringing Julian Fleming in, he's not a freak athlete. He's not a guy that's going to go light things up and, beat you.
Hell of a car commercial, though.
Yeah, a great car commercial. Yeah. I think he's embraced his story, like what he was supposed to be, what a lot of people thought he was supposed to be in the first place. And he feels comfortable at Penn State. And we were talking with Chuck Losey, the strength coach, yesterday. And he's like, he knows these guys. Like these guys know him from the recruiting process, from him being Julian Fleming, big fish in a small school pond in Pennsylvania. All of a sudden, you thought he was going to go to Penn State. He gave people indications he was going to go to Penn State. And then, Ohio State is such a monster that they were able to take him away. And then he's become the third. And then eventually he became the third receiver at Ohio State under some really, really good players. But I think just that mentality, that leadership role, accepting what you are and what you are not is such a big part of college football. And it's so tough for these guys. Julian was, I think, the number 1 player in the country by ESPN. Like he was a bona fide 5. I think everybody had him as consensus 5-star. Like accepting what you are and accepting what you aren't will get you far in college football, will get you far in life. And I think he's done that. And I think he realizes what he can be for this team, even if it means he's not catching 60 balls.
I think I said Quintez Cephas earlier. I meant Dante Cephas, but my apologies to former Wisconsin receiver Quintez Cephas, who had a great career with the Badgers. But it is interesting, like the former 5-star guys coming. Nolan Rucci's another guy like that, who was an in-state guy, offensive lineman. So Julian Fleming went to Ohio State to play receiver because how do you say no to Mike Hartline at this point? Like the draft history sort of tells you what to do. Nolan Rucci, offensive lineman, 5-star guy out of Pennsylvania, went to Wisconsin to play offensive line. Now he's coming back. So I do wonder if some of that, are they going to be able to get more out of their transfer portal guys than they've gotten thus far?
I think in excuse me, I don't know where that came from. I think in the transfer portal, what they've gotten in the last couple of years has been those splash guys. They've gotten Chop Robinson, Arnold Ebiketie was fantastic. You've had guys that have come in, been not only starters but like all Big Ten level players. This class is interesting to me because I think maybe you get that at corner. AJ Harris and Jalen Kimber have done well so far, but Rucci and Fleming went somewhere else. It was not the plan that they expected it to be. And hey, you're always welcome home here. That's why you don't burn bridges in recruiting. So I think that that's been the pitch from Penn State is like, you can do what you can sort of, maybe you had that dream as a kid. Nolan Rucci's a legacy prospect. His dad played here. His dad was very good. Maybe you had that dream at one point. Maybe your dreams change at some point, but you can come back around and maybe you can thrive in that. Wisconsin is really interesting because I don't think he found the Wisconsin that everybody is still thinking the Wisconsin is. And it's changed a lot. Like it's changed.
Their O-line culture is not what it was 4 or 5 years ago.
I agree with that. It's going to be interesting to see when you take the divisions out of that, how a team like Wisconsin responds, but we're not talking about Wisconsin right now. It's just very interesting with that culture and that whole recruitment, which was around COVID, didn't get to visit things. He had his older brother at Wisconsin, who is going to be going to try his hand at the NFL this year. But no, it was just very different. And that I think is the sort of the lesson in this portal era when you're talking about coming back around and recruiting these guys. Arnold Ebiketie was a defensive end from Maryland. He went to Temple. He did great at Temple. He had peripheral interest from Penn State. Like they came up and, it was not a situation where they were going to offer him and things like that. Derek Tangelo was the same way at Duke. So they build these relationships and they've got a fantastic recruiting staff at Penn State. They build these relationships where you can potentially set yourself up for success later. And I think that's what they've done. And these commitments that they've gotten this offseason from Fleming, from Rucci are sort of based in that, but based on sort of the American dream type of way of going about this. And that's really campy and terrible experience. But like the best part of this, or you can be the best part of what you thought maybe one day that you thought you could be. So I think that's the pitch here, even if they're not going to be world beaters and they're 5-star guys, but you still hope there's something there if you're Penn State.
Right. And you get help from that. Now you mentioned the defensive end position. It gets very interesting now because the other day we talked to JD Piquel, who had Brian Kelly on from LSU. And the question Brian Kelly gets everywhere he goes is, how are you going to use Harold Perkins this year? Why don't you have Harold Perkins rushing the passer? Why are you wasting everyone's time with him playing in space? So Abdul Carter, very similar situation, probably not NFL edge rusher size, but when he gets put on the line of scrimmage, he gets around offensive linemen and gets to the quarterback. They are going to do that and put him on the line of scrimmage this year. How did that decision get made, and what do you expect to see from him?
I think this is something that's coming. If you look at Abdul as a linebacker, ton of production, but more potential. Like there were things that when everybody was fawning over him as a freshman, you're like, this guy has to improve on sort of the nuances of the position. Now you just go get the football. I mean, like I don't think there's too much like to talk about there in terms of like why this best fits Tom Allen's defense or anything like that. When this guy goes after the ball, he usually gets to the ball, and that's a straightforward type of thing. And that Abdul Carter has always been a straightforward type of player. So I think that's really went into it. I kind of push back at the notion that he can't be a defensive end at the pro level, because I think this guy is the next in a line of freaks. Like you saw Chop Robinson at the at Pro Day.
Combine. He was awesome.
Combine, yeah. It was incredible. Adisa Isaac was kind of, we gloss over that, but he was very good as well. But Abdul's in that same mold. And I think Abdul's body, we talked to Chuck Losley yesterday, the strength coach, Abdul's body will go any way that you want it to, because he is that type of athlete. He is that type of sort of physical freak there. He might be 255, 260 by the time the season starts.
Which would be fine in the NFL, by the way.
Yeah, it is.
That would be plenty.
It's so funny. But no, I mean, it's a situation where I just think see ball, get ball. And I think that really maybe a 3-4 outside linebacker might be his best fit. And I think that really diversifies his skill set, moving him to defensive end. They've got a lot of numbers at linebacker. They're really high on Tony Rojas, the sophomore, who can maybe step in and do some really nice things for them. So like this is this is a situation where we're just kind of splitting hairs on defense. Penn State's been so good on defense for so many years, and they make a change like this. But if this happened on the offensive side of the ball, where a guy you move Nick Singleton to slot receiver or something like that, it would just completely blow up. And now you kind of give Penn State the benefit of the doubt here and say, hey, it's Penn State's defense. It's probably going to work out.
Oh, I think it's definitely, you're doing the thing he's really good at. Like that's the thing that I sometimes wonder when they don't have the person just do the thing they're good at. Abdul Carter is a freaky pass rusher. I wonder, like, is this what, let's say 2020 had been a normal season? Like, is that what Micah Parsons would have been in his last year at Penn State?
Yeah, that's the plan. I said this on our show on BWI a couple weeks ago. Like, this is what you wanted to see from Micah Parsons. This is what you were going to see from Micah Parsons. And then the COVID season comes and he does not play. I hesitate to compare anyone to Micah Parsons, but since Micah Parsons has been here, he's the closest thing to him.
All right, let's talk about this schedule, because I texted this the other day. I said this on the show. I think this might be the most interesting Penn State schedule since they were an independent, because the divisions in the Big Ten, whether it be they leaders and legends or the East and West, it never felt like there was a lot of variety. And now, and maybe just because of some of it's new, but the at West Virginia start, because West Virginia is going to be good this year. They're coming off a 9-win season, bring back most of what made them good. They get both of the California teams back to back. They get UCLA at home. They go to USC in an incredible, like, that's one of those incredible TV call, like, get the Keith Jackson hologram going to call that game. How do we make that happen?
I can't. I'm just sitting here visualizing, and it's perfect. I mean, it's just, oh man, can you imagine? No, but I mean, you look at the front half of that schedule. West Virginia tricky, and going to Morgantown. Nobody likes to go to Morgantown. It's a good team. I do think that Penn State's defensive line versus what should be a retooled West Virginia offensive line, might change some things. Penn State sort of kept them at arm's length this past year. That was kind of a different West Virginia team than we saw down the stretch. But yeah, you look at the first half of that schedule, and it's different. I don't know that it's daunting. I'd call it daunting. You get UCLA, obviously going to be a rebuild there. Going to USC, you're going to see what you've got with Caleb Williams. So there's some tricky spots, but it's just, I want to say, different story with sort of the same story with different sort of characters there. Then you get to the back half of the schedule, and that's where it gets
Yeah. You said you weren't going to talk Wisconsin, but we can talk a little bit of Wisconsin, because they go to Camp Randall on October 26th. It's sandwiched. Now they get a bye week after that, USC, but they've got that one right before they go to Camp Randall, right before they go to Ohio State, and then they get Washington at home right after that. That's as challenging a stretch as you're going to find. And the old 2-game season situation is over. This is called, this is the 3-game sandwich stretch. It's just in the middle where you get. You make or break yourself here. Like, you go 2-1 in that stretch, you're in the playoff.
Absolutely. Now, Washington, it stings a little bit less with Kalen DeBoer going to Alabama, so you're not sure what that's going to bring back. Wisconsin, of course, we talked about them. It's very fascinating to see which direction they're going to go. And then, of course, you got the monster there in Ohio State. You had the 2-game schedule where it was 2 monsters, and then you throw an Iowa in there.
Right.
Minnesota's been tricky at times. You've had those tricky games.
I mean, they're gonna run back the 9 overtime game with Illinois.
Let's never bring that up again, please. PTSD is not good with that one. But yeah, I mean, I thought Illinois last year would be a tricky game, and it was. Because Juice Newton was an absolute monster in that game. But like you have these certain little things, and that's the funny thing with college football in general, is you circle all these games and then you sort of white out all the other ones because they all feel the same. The Purdue, the Minnesota, Maryland, all those kind of things. That's not the case. It's really hard to win football games in the Big Ten, regardless of what that other team's record is. So we will see what happens with that. But yeah, that stretch going to Wisconsin, which they got a win last time they were at Wisconsin. I'm fascinated to see what that team looks like, especially by October, how deep they are. Obviously, we know that they can coach, so that's good. Then Ohio State is Ohio State. I mean, that's not changing. I think they're going to be a monster once again this year. And then Washington was a little bit more of an eye catcher a couple of months ago.
Mhm.
Obviously coming off the national championship game appearance, but then so many things changed. So
Yeah, very, very different team.
yeah,
But obviously what the team does on the field is what matters most. But I'm curious how the fan base feels about the schedule. It feels like this would give you some new energy in terms of, because Penn State, especially more so than Ohio State or Michigan, feels like they've been banging their head against the same wall over and so anything that at least changes the shape of the wall helps, right?
that's the way I'm approaching it. It's like, hey, we got a road trip to USC. You're going out and seeing these different stadiums, these different things. So it's a reset in that. Yeah, everything is new. Coordinators are new, but I think you're gonna have a hard time. There's a lot of apathy right now. There's a lot of apathy in a 10-win season, as dumb as that sounds. But folks are just seeing the same guy at the head coaching spot, and it's tough to convince them otherwise. Now, I do think it changes everything. I think it changes. I think you're probably favored in 10 or 11 games. Would you say that the
Yeah.
win total 9.5? I mean, nothing changes there. But yeah, it's just a different coat of paint on it. And I'm very curious to see how Penn State fans react over the next 6 months or so till they get to West Virginia.
So I'm looking at the schedule right now. I'm just going through. I think they're going to be favored in 11 games. I think they're going to be favored in every game except Ohio State. The thing that could change that is if USC turns out to be really good with the new defensive coordinator, and but we don't know that yet. But they're going to be favored. You're right, 10 or 11 games. 10 wins is a reasonable expectation for this team. Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.